Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Essay. Today we are gonna see what if Isseis saved the universe and exiled himself to his own dimension. Part 2. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. You. Rainer growled, seeing the object of her hatred. Kakabiel cast his uninterested gaze on her for a second before it returned to Issei, the corners of his lips curling up as the human made no effort to move. So, you said you'd kill me, right? Issei finally said, one hand on a hip as he observed his nails in a mocking manner. Kakabiel's half-smile disappeared in an instant as it was replaced with a deep frown that Issei paid no attention to. Kakabiel raised a single hand in the air, summoned a spear of light and tossed at the human in front of him, said spear shattering mid-flight as Issei sighed. So we're doing this the hard way, then. No matter. Because you're in the process of betraying Azazel, it shouldn't matter if I kill you. Kakabiel's eyes widened as Issei took a single step forward. How do you know that? Issei grinned as he lunged forward and pulled his fist back. I know a lot of things. Issei responded, ignoring Kakabiel's question in its entirety. Issei released his fist, watched as Kakabiel disappeared in a flurry of wind and pouted, retracting his fist from an imaginary stomach with a small groan of disappointment. So do I. Issei twisted his body to the side and whistled as Kakabiel's fist, an appendage that was almost invisible to the naked eye, flew past his face. Issei spun around with his arm outstretched, not expecting his backhand punch to connect with Kakabiel's face. As bone connected with flesh, though, Issei rose an eyebrow. All of a sudden Issei's world was tipped upside down as he flew through the air in an arc before an elbow connected with his stomach, sending him flying into the floor at breakneck speeds. Issei coughed up blood as he hit the floor, bouncing once, before another elbow collided with his stomach, sending him through the floor beneath him and into the middle of his living room. Issei rolled to his side, dodging a pointed hand that was aimed at his throat, before he scrambled to his feet, blood dripping from the corners of his mouth. Issei pulled his fists close to his face in a boxing stance. You're pretty good, Kakabiel. Issei called out to the fallen angel, the angel of the stars glancing at the human as he clicked his tongue. And so are you, human. Although, you are not good enough. Surrender and I will spare you. If you wish to continue, I will murder you as my subordinates take Rainer away from this place. Issei used his sleeve to wipe the blood off of his face, a dark grin soon consuming his features. Bring it on. I'll kill you before your friends get here. Kakabiel rose an eyebrow. Oh? A challenge. Issei took a single deep breath before he dug his heels into the hard ground, his face hardening moments later. Let's go. In an instant, Kakabiel disappeared once more and reappeared behind Issei, both of his hands clasped together above Issei's head. Kakabiel, with as much force as he could muster, lowered his two hands, expecting his attack to crush the skull of the puny human that stood in front of him, unmoving, but when his attack met nothing but air, it was Kakabiel's turn to receive an attack to the head. Issei's fist smashed against Kakabiel's head as the fallen angel tried to lunge forward to dodge the attack, but because his body was too slow, he was forced to tank the hit. As soon as Issei's attack hit, Kakabiel spun around and launched a fist at Issei's face, the human leaning back to dodge the strike as soon as he saw it. Issei sent a straight jab at Kakabiel's face in return, the fallen angel jumping back twice to create some distance between the two, crushing a coffee table in the process. Issei greedily panted for air. Man, even if I do have the ability to make this body super strong and fast, I can't force it to have good cardio. He muttered to himself, watching Kakabiel as closely as he could. Is something wrong, human? Kakabiel asked, observing the human's body. While Kakabiel was able to discern that he had an unbelievably large amount of mana, his body was weak. The only reason the human was able to hurt him was because of the magic that constantly reinforced his body, making it faster and stronger than Kakabiel's. Nothing yet. Issei said grimly. He wasn't looking forward to his future after his fight. With his extremely bad cardio, he was most likely going to die. Issei ducked under a punch as Kakabiel appeared in front of him, Issei's hand forming into a fist as he jumped up. Kakabiel tilted his head back and dodged the attack, a grin spreading across his face. It was nice playing with you, boy. Kakabiel muttered. The wall crumbled under Issei's back as he was sent flying through it, plaster exploding everywhere as the air in his lungs escaped his body. Issei smashed through a fence, collided with the outside wall of his neighbor's house and bounced off of it, slowly soaring through the air and towards the dirt ground. All of a sudden, Kakabiel was floating above Issei, a spear of light in his hand as he pulled his arm back. This is the end. There was a small explosion of dust as Kakabiel's attack connected with something. Because the two of them were fighting faster than the eye could see, the fallen angel couldn't see if he had hit the human. But it was a guaranteed hit. With no way to dodge or move, Issei was certainly dead. Kakabiel stood in the midst of the dust cloud, his hands folded against his chest as he huffed. That human should have surrendered when he had the chance. The dust cloud slowly settled. Hunched over, panting as blood streamed down his face from a wound on his head, Isseis stood in the middle of a small crater. He gave a shaky thumbs up, fell onto one knee, and quickly used a hand to support himself. You almost had me, Kakabiel. It's a good thing I have a few tricks up my sleeve. Kakabiel quietly growled. What's this? You should have died. Issei grinned and chuckled, slowly finding the strength to stand on his 2 feet. Apparently not. Kakabiel rushed over to Issei and produced 2 light spears, one in each hand, and raised them into the air. But you will die now, human. Issei glanced up at the light spears and sighed as they descended upon his head, both weapons shattering upon impact, as if they were nothing but a window pane. Try again, Kakabiel. Another spear exploded, followed by another and then a third. Kakabiel growled and grabbed Issei by the head, lifting him up into the air. Just die already. Issei would have shaken his head if he had the freedom to do so. Sorry, but I can't die. Not yet, at least. I have a world to destroy and a future to change. Kakabiel sharpened his eyes. Destroy the world. Issei chuckled and cast his gaze upon Kakabiel, as if he was nothing but a small joke. Yeah, totally. Like I'm strong enough to destroy the world. Kakabiel threw Issei at the ground and watched as he casually bounced off of it as if he was a ball. Issei turned his body in the air, landed on his feet with a small grin and bowed. If you're stupid enough to believe that, then I think you should leave, Kakabiel. Unless you want to discuss astrology, that is. Ah, you're nothing but a fool. By now, Raynor is no longer in your home. My subordinates have already taken her away from here. Issei sighed. Do I have to raid the Grigori now? Kakabiel turned away from Issei. If you care for Raynor, I suggest you do. Issei watched as Kakabiel disappeared in a flash, dust being kicked up from a strong gale that he had left behind. The human stared at the setting sun as he sighed. Next time I won't graciously spare you. A voice reached Issei's ears as he observed his healing wounds. Man, to think I got all sentimental and emotional a couple of minutes ago and it was all a waste, it didn't even make sense. Whoever's making me do this stuff is pretty bad at their job. Issei's words trailed off as he stared at the gaping hole in his wall, his mouth wide open as he struggled to form any words. My parents will surely kill me. Jerry Trap, I require your assistance. Ria's eyebrow twitched as she dropped her cup of tea, the porcelain smashing on the hard floor. Riaz did not want to see Issei at all. After their earlier conversation and the embarrassment that she had suffered, it was normal for an elegant being, such as herself, to feel irritated at the sight of such a horrendous human that could make anyone do unspeakable things. Riaz still forced herself to smile with eyes that were clamped shut. If she didn't have her eyes hidden, she would surely glare at the object of her annoyance, so much so that they would suddenly catch fire and transform into a pile of ash. Yes, Issei? Issei jumped onto the couch opposite Riaz with a deep frown. I may have unintentionally made a hole in the wall and the roof at my home. Riaz deadpanned. Was the human in front of her serious? Did he really make a hole in the roof and wall of his house of his home? He was surely joking, but if his frown was anything to go by, Riaz was able to see that Issei was telling the truth. It didn't matter, though. The devil had no intention of helping him. I can't help you, Issei. Issei pouted. His hopes and dreams were instantly shattered. The one person that could help had denied his request, and it was all because of a little bullying that had occurred earlier in the day. Issei inwardly winced. I guess every action does have a consequence. He muttered to himself. Riaz nodded in agreement as she folded her arms under her bust with one leg crossed over the other. I would have to agree with you there, Issei. Despite the fact that Issei had been denied, it didn't mean he wouldn't beg and grovel until he got what he wanted. He didn't have any pride or sense of shame that was stopping him from getting on his hands and knees with his head hanging low, even if there was porcelain all over the floor that would cut his skin. He thought that pride was for the arrogant and that was shame was for the idiotic, so as he took a deep breath and prepared himself to shout for what he wanted like a true Japanese man, he realized that nothing was going to stop him. His mind and spirit were invincible. Riaz Gremory. I beg of you to help me fix the hole in my roof and wall. Riaz would later say that she saw the window pane shake in place as Issei screamed. The devil hurriedly covered her ears with her hands. I will do anything in return for this favor. Even though Riaz was covering her ears with her hands, the screams were loud enough to penetrate the physical mass that was blocking the sound waves that would surely deafen the devil. Her hands offered very little protection at this point, so Riaz dropped them down to her side with a groan of annoyance. Did you mean it when you said you'd do anything if I helped you? Issei looked up at Riaz from his position on the floor and nodded his head so fast it could have snapped his neck. Riaz hummed in thought and raised a hand to her chin, contemplating on what she would have Issei do. Should she tell him to stop calling her by that humiliating nickname? Maybe he would become a devil in Riaz's peerage. He would be a great asset after all, as he was stronger than her knight and rook combined. In fact, Riaz thought that Issei would be able to defeat her knight, rook and queen, with all three fighting as one. Yes. Riaz grinned as she looked down at Issei. In return for humiliating her earlier on in the day, she would force him to suffer a fate worse than what she had suffered. Ria slipped one of her shoes off of her feet and pulled her sock off, wiggling her toes in the air as a devilish grin spread across her face. "If you lick my foot, I might help you." "Sorry, no can do." Issei called out as he opened the door to the clubroom. Ria's held a hand out as she scrambled to her feet, rushing over to the human. The devil fell to her knees, grabbed the human's trousers with an iron grip and let fake tears stream down her face. "I am sorry. I won't make you lick my feet. I realize that it's a perverted thing to say and do, so I'm sorry. Please don't bully me anymore." "Sorry, no can do." Issei said as he stuck his leg out to the side, shaking it around in the air as he tried to get Ria's to let go of him. He sighed, realizing that she wouldn't let go and awkwardly limped over to the couch, the devil sliding along the floor as she kicked her legs around as if she was having a tantrum. "Get up," Issei said as he looked down at the devil who was in a pitiful state. "No. I don't want to." Issei crouched and grabbed the wrist of the devil, tightening his grip. Shortly after, with a whimper of pain and more tears, Ria's forced herself to let go of Issei, holding each wrist in the air. "Boy, cherry trap, are you still a baby?" Ria's discontinued her tantrum and pushed herself to her feet. She coughed into a hand, sat on the couch that was behind her and folded her arms, acting as if nothing had happened. That was what she wanted, anyway. Ria's didn't want anyone to know what had just transpired. It was embarrassing and would ruin her reputation, but if she knew the human as well as she thought she did, he'd most certainly spread rumors of her disgraceful behavior if she did not help him. By unintentionally having a tantrum, Ria's had given Issei some material to use as blackmail. "Sorry about that. I lost my composure for a second." Issei shot Ria's a look of disapproval as Ria's had turned into a child for several minutes, not a single second. Even though Issei was taking Ria's words to heart and did not think of them as nothing more than an excuse and a simple saying for the time frame in which all hell had broken loose, Issei couldn't help but feel disappointed. Was this all the fun he would find in this conversation? "That was more than a second, you know." Issei responded with a shallow exhale as he stared at the devil's red cheeks. "Right. Anyway, I'm still not going to help you, Issei. This was your own fault." Ria's words left Issei with no choice. Because he was intending on hiding the fact that there were fallen angels in Ria's territory, namely Kakabiel and his friends, he had to hide the truth. But, now that he was left no choice, he had to tell Ria's about everything that had happened because he wanted his wall and roof to be fixed. "You leave me with no choice, Ria's." Ria's rose an eyebrow, not understanding what Issei was trying to say. "What do you mean? What do you know about Kakabiel, the angel of the stars?" Issei stared into Ria's anxious blue-green orbs and waited for her response. The devil, however, had many thoughts rushing through her mind at speeds that were incomprehensible. Was the second most powerful fallen angel in her territory? If he was, what was he doing there? Was he planning on kidnapping her or killing her? Did he want to start another war? "Ria's. Are you okay?" Issei said after a minute of silence, knowing why the girl in front of him was not responding. If someone had come to the conclusion that an extremely powerful being was currently living on their land, anyone would be shocked. "He's here, isn't he?" Issei nodded once with a grim smile. The truth that he was trying to withhold had finally been revealed and there was nothing he could do about it. Rather, there was nothing he could do to withhold it. It was an important piece of information that Ria's needed to know because of the danger of the entity that was involved. "Unfortunately, he is. That's why I have a hole in my roof and wall. He wanted to take Rainer away, even though she hates him now, and I refused. So we fought." Ria's recoiled from the shock. In her mind, there was no way Issei, a human who, using her knowledge about him, had barely managed to defeat a fallen angel of the lowest rank, would be able to fight toe-to-toe with Kakabiel, an entity that is just as powerful as her brother. "You managed to ward him off." Issei snorted in response to Ria's words. "He didn't make Kakabiel run away. Kakabiel missed his finishing attack because of a little hat trick that Issei used, one that involved wind magic, the ground and plenty of skill. Suddenly creating a burst of wind to pivot your body was harder than it sounded, and Issei's flawless execution of the trick was a testimony to his real skill. Not really. He ran away because I dodged his finishing skill. That, and he was stalling for time." Ria's ran a hand through her hair. She was anxious and stressed. No, she was more than anxious and stressed. She feared for her life and she didn't know what she would do about it. Should she call for her brother's aid? No, it would take too long for reinforcements to arrive. Anything could happen between now and then, so would it be best if Ria's and her peerage, as well as Issei, raided the place that Kakabiel was staying at? "Issei, what do we do?" Ria's muttered, hoping that the immensely strong human that sat in front of her could help her. She needed guidance. She can't ask her brother because he would freak out and possibly start a war. She couldn't get help from her parents because of the same reasons. Sona Citri, her friend and fellow devil, wouldn't help because most members in her peerage were inexperienced or weren't powerful enough. There was no one that could help her. On the one hand, she didn't want to start a war, but on the other, she wanted help from a powerful being. Issei spoke, "I say we engage in a skirmish. It's our best option right now." Ria's nod once, approving Issei's words because she wholeheartedly agreed with the human. But two questions popped into Ria's mind. When would they strike and where would they fight? They didn't know where Kakabiel was staying. He could be in the underworld for all they knew, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. If Kakabiel was in the underworld, everything was fine for Rias. The potential crisis had been averted. But if he was in the human world, where was he? But we don't know where he is. Rias responded. Issei held a hand to his chin and hummed in thought. If they wanted to find Kakabiel, they could rely on Kaneko and her senjutsu, even if the Nekomata didn't want to actively use it because of her past. It wouldn't be a good idea to suggest it, anyway, as Issei is supposed to have no knowledge of that power. Not yet, anyway. Does anyone in the peerage have a sensing or tracking ability? Rias frowned. The only person was Kaneko, but without using her senjutsu her sensing ability was rather weak. We have Kaneko but she won't use her power. Issei pursed his lips. There was nothing they could do, then. If Kaneko wouldn't use her power, they wouldn't be able to find Kakabiel, because it would take too long to scour the whole city and its surroundings. There was one place he could be, though, but Issei highly doubted that Kakabiel would be there. The abandoned church on the hill. He might be there because of a group of his subordinates that were hiding under the building. When do we strike? Rias asked, hoping that Kakabiel wasn't there. As much as she hated to admit it, she didn't want to die so soon, even if she had to fulfill her duty as the lord of her territory. Tonight. Gather your forces. I'll be a scout. Rias nodded once as both the human and herself slowly made their way into a standing position. I must go, then. If I don't find Kakabiel or any fallen angel there, I'll give you a call. Oh, can I have your phone number if that's the case? Issei dug into a pocket and pulled his cell phone. Despite the high speeds and strength that was displayed during his fight with Kakabiel, his phone was surprisingly fine. Ah, right. Rias procured her phone from a pocket in her skirt. Before I go, I have one request. Rias tilted her head to the side as Issei copied her contact information onto his phone, appropriately naming Ria's contact file as Cherry Trap. What is it? Issei grinned. Fix the holes in my house. The forest that surrounded the old desolate building was silent. There was nary a sound nor a living being in sight, other than a group of 5 that skulked behind a dense thicket of greenery. The trees would not move and the grass would not wave in the wind. Not the best night for a stealth operation. Issei Hyoudou, one of members of the group of 5, had muttered. So what do we do? Rias Gremory asked in response, her arms folded against her chest. Issei shot her an annoyed look and sighed. With their earlier conversation still fresh in their mind, Issei had expected the devil to remember what they were supposed to be doing. It's not as if they were planning to sneak into the abandoned church and assassinate Kakabiel. Issei had explicitly mentioned that he and the Gremory peerage would launch an assault or skirmish of some kind instead. Gremory, we're going to assault the church. You know, that thing where you guys blow everything up? Rias sighed and massaged the bridge of her nose. She wasn't prepared for what they were going to do. Attacking a fallen angel base that may temporarily house one of their strongest warriors was suicide, especially if you didn't have the power to defeat them. But Gremory knew she didn't have to worry about Kakabiel. Something was telling her that Issei could defeat the Angel of the Stars, even if the human did look weak. Yeah, we get it. We defeat the small fry, you take on Kakabiel, and everyone wins. Correct. Issei chuckled. It was questionable if everyone would win, but the odds did seem to be in their favor. Somewhat. Anyway, I'm going to go now. Don't come in until I say you can. Issei watched as Rias sighed before he burst through the thick clump of bushes that hid them from an outsider's view, his hands placed in his pockets. As he approached the large double doors that were made of a hard wood, he contemplated how he would enter the building. Did he want to kick the door open and vaporize anyone that may be in there with fire magic? Or would he jump through the door and create a hole? Maybe he would destroy the whole wall just by walking through it. Issei came to a stop in front of the doors. He glanced up at the small circle of stained glass that comfortably sat above the arching doors and huffed in amusement, noting that the church seemed to be more of a small cathedral with its stained glass, high ceilings and spires. It was different from what Issei had seen in his own timeline, and the omnipotent human could confirm this. In fact, in all of the other timelines he had seen, it had still been the same abandoned church that had a simple design, not a small cathedral that was grand and luxurious. With a raised foot, hands still in his pockets, Issei planted his foot against the double doors and forced them open, the hardwood cracking as they smashed against a wall on either side of the entrance. Issei peered into the building, furrowing his brow at the lifeless interior. There were many rows of pews with an extravagant altar that was covered by a golden trimmed fabric sitting at the end of the building on a raised platform. There was also large colored windows that depicted several religious figures and events, obscuring any view to the outside world, with a large circular pane high above the altar, barely illuminating the walkway between the pews. But, despite the fully furnished and untouched interior, the building was devoid of life. There was absolutely nothing. Well, that was anticlimactic. Issei slowly muttered, further observing his surroundings in case Kakabiel had planned an ambush. Not that Kakabiel knew of their planned assault, the fallen angel had thought he had done quite a good job in hinting that he was under orders from the Grigori. However, Issei could see through Kakabiel's earlier statement. The fallen angel was betraying Azazel, a topic that Issei had briefly mentioned before their fight, so it would be an embarrassment for Riaz to claim that Azazel was at fault for what he had ordered Kakabiel to do. So, with Issei's knowledge of many timelines and his own experiences, the human knew that Kakabiel would be somewhere in the human world. Somewhere overseas was obviously too far for the ordinary fallen angels to travel, so if Kakabiel wanted backup in a fight, he had no choice but to stay in the local area. The town that Riaz had lordship over was the best choice, Issei concluded, as he could easily hide from the naive devil. It wasn't as if she was powerful enough to take him down in the event that he was discovered, so the Angel of the Stars should be more than confident in his ability to stay safe in case he really was discovered. Issei slowly approached the altar after confirming that there weren't any enemies that were hidden in the shadows. However, even if Issei did have the ability to strengthen his body with magic, he wasn't able to increase his night vision, so if a fallen angel or stray exorcist was fully dressed in black and was standing in a corner away from the moonlight, they'd be able to hide from the human as if it was child's play. And that is exactly what had happened. The man pushed himself off of a wall in a corner and silently approached the altar, stopping short of the extravagant structure. He clasped his hands together in a prayer, muttered a few words to himself and turned around, his red eyes sharp. He wore a black fedora, black coat, black pants and an unusually dark red scarf that covered his mouth with a pair of black boots that covered his feet. There was a gun that sat in a thigh holster and a sheathed sword that was connected to his waist. The stray exorcist Issei whispered to himself, his fingers twitching in anticipation, an indescribable feeling welling up inside of him. Issei's breath quickly became ragged as a grin spread across his face, insanity threatening to consume him as the stray exorcists slowly made their way down the stairs of the platform that the altar was built on. Issei's mind temporarily became blank before his thoughts came back to him, all preconceived notions of stopping his insanity disappearing in favor of thoughts that involved the murder of the stray exorcist. In the back of Issei's mind, he knew he had fallen to his insanity once more. Indeed. The man's gruff voice echoed throughout the hall as he spoke, sending shivers down Issei's spine. The omnipotent human's grin morphed into a toothy smile of madness, a quiet chuckle building up in his throat. My name is Fried Selzen. What is yours, human? My name is Issei Hyoudou. It's a pleasure to meet you. Issei bowed so as to mock the stray exorcist. Fried stopped short of Issei and stretched his fingers out as he prepared to grab his gun, intending on ending the human in front of him. Fried wasn't killing Issei because of his friendship with the devil, but because of Issei's insanity that had been displayed as soon as Fried had shown himself. It was quite pitiful in his mind. After all, a human that had fallen to madness instead of harnessing his powers was something that required some pity, even if it was just a little bit. Are you associated with the devils of this territory? I sensed their presence in the area. Issei chuckled in response, his eyes tightly shut. Even if I told you, it wouldn't matter. Fried rose an eyebrow in response to Issei's ambitious statement. Oh? You think you can beat me, human? Issei chuckled in response and was in front of Fried in an instant, his hand in the form of a fist, as he pulled his arm back. Fried widened his eyes in response and twisted his body to the side to dodge the strike, surprise consuming his mostly concealed face. Of course I can, Fried. Issei muttered as his initial strike missed, multiple thoughts rushing through his mind. The rational side of Issei was telling him that Fried wasn't supposed to be sane, the stray exorcist should be the deranged man that had a vulgar mouth and a violent personality. His irrational side ignored his rational side and told Issei that all of it didn't matter and that as long as he killed Fried, everything would be okay. Issei realized that it was his irrational side that was feeding his insanity, but it was too late to stop his transformation. He was already insane and had become what Fried should be, but as the stray exorcist dodged another strike from Issei, the omnipotent human came to realize that it didn't matter. Not in the middle of a fight, anyway. Fried's change in personality was a difference in this current timeline, Issei had quickly noted as he dodged a swift jab from Fried. It was strange when Issei thought deeply about it. Had he really noted many differences in other timelines? Sure, there were some things that would stay the same, but was it ever this different? It wasn't. It never was. In hindsight, Issei should have realized that he was the one that changed, nothing else, and because of his changes, every event would end in various ways. He was always the cause for everything that happened. He was the one that made things change. But now it was all different. From the Ars Gotia to Ria's bratty attitude and now Fried. The changes weren't many, but they were still there and they puzzled him. But Issei had to dispel his thoughts. He needed to defeat Fried and then Kakabiel before he could think about such things. Issei caught Fried's fist as it flew towards him and grinned as he began to twist it, a growl coming from the stray exorcist. "Oh, no you don't." Fried muttered as he reached for his pistol, his hand immediately on the grip as he drew it from its holster. Issei was forced to let go of Fried as he jumped to the side. A real bullet was fired from the barrel, the gunshot echoing throughout the hall. Issei ducked to the side, barely missing the second bullet before he rushed forward, Fried placing his gun back into his holster with a click of his tongue. Fried's gun wasn't any ordinary weapon. Unbeknownst to Issei, it was capable of firing both normal bullets and light bullets. With the flick of a switch, Fried was free to choose what kind of ammunition he could fire if he channeled a bit of his magic into a seal on the trigger. To make matters worse, it wasn't a revolver or a gun that required one to fan the hammer for rapid shots, it was a standard 9mm semi-automatic pistol, which would allow one to fire all of the ammo of a clip in a matter of seconds. It was a convenient weapon for a stray exorcist that constantly dealt with the undead and other demonic beasts, as well as the occasional human. "You're pretty good," Issei muttered as he ducked under a roundhouse kick that would have hit him in the head. Taking advantage of Fried's opening, Issei reached up to grab his leg. "You are much better than I expected you to be." Fried muttered in response, a hidden grin forming on his face as he used the momentum from his earlier attack to form a dropkick that would surely connect with Issei's skull, even if the transition between movements was almost impossible for an ordinary person. As Fried's leg fell through the sky, the wind screeching around it as it flew through the air at superhuman speeds, Fried's confidence in his victory skyrocketing. However, as soon as his leg should have hit Issei, it connected with nothing but air, continuing its trajectory until it hit the floor, creating cracks in the stone. Fried rapidly glanced in every direction possible, trying to find Issei. But he couldn't find him. The omnipotent and seemingly insane human was gone as if he had never existed. There wasn't a single trace of his existence. There was nothing. "What the?" Fried muttered as he realized that the human was gone. A thought had occurred in his mind. Did that human even exist in the first place? Was his monstrous past finally making him insane? Was that human a physical representation of what he would become? Fried narrowed his eyes. He hadn't looked above him, and that was the only place the human could have been, and if he wasn't there, Fried would declare himself to be mentally insane. It's not as if the human could be above him, anyway. It was certainly impossible. Fried, with a knot slowly forming in his stomach, tilted his head back. His eyes widened from shock. Hanging from the roof, no, standing upside down with the ceiling as the floor was the human, his feet firmly planted against the stone. "You finally found me, huh?" Issei called out with a grin. Fried opened to his mouth to express his disbelief, but in that very moment, Issei's hand was pressed against his forehead. Fried was forced to the ground, his head smashing against the hard floor, a hiss coming from his mouth at the inconceivable pain, before Issei used the momentum of his fall to pivot his body into a roll, his feet firmly planted against the floor as he finished the smooth movement. He pulled his arm back, his hands still gripping Fried's skull, and threw the stray exorcist through a window with ease. Issei watched as his opponent's back connected with a thick tree, the exorcist falling onto his stomach soon after. He didn't move. Issei silently declared his victory as he straightened his back. He fell onto his knees and planted his hands against the floor as the strain of the fight was too much for his weak body. He quietly gasped for air and watched as his sweat dripped onto floor. Maybe that was overkill, he quietly muttered to himself. Issei didn't mention his insanity. It was the second time it had happened. It wasn't a comfortable topic to think about. "Are you alright, Issei?" Rias called out from the broken window. Although the stray exorcist had been dealt with in a timely manner, Issei's behavior wasn't reassuring in the slightest. Not after the conversation that the devil had clearly heard from outside the church. Issei glanced up at Rias and offered a shaky thumbs up. "Yeah, I'm dealing with some inner turmoil at the moment, going a little insane." Rias furrowed her brow. "Really?" Issei chuckled in response to Rias' question. No, I'm not going insane." Issei pushed himself to his feet and offered a small smile that he hoped would convey that he was doing fine. His insanity was only temporary. There was no way he needed to be afraid. He wouldn't lose his mind and kill everyone in the vicinity. Everything would be fine. He hoped it would be fine, anyway. The staircase was dark. It was too dark for Issei. He couldn't see a damn thing, the only sounds were the repetitive clanks of his footsteps, and it was dusty. The omnipotent human wanted to get the job done, go home and peacefully sleep in his house that doesn't have a hole in the wall. Issei really needed to thank Rias for fixing the hole in his wall. "So where exactly does this take us?" Kiba asked from at the back of the group, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Issei didn't turn to look back at Kiba as he spoke, his eyes focusing on the stairs he couldn't see through the darkness. "We'll find out when we get there." Kiba didn't respond. There was nothing more to say, after all. If Issei didn't know where it was taking them, which he honestly didn't know where it was taking them, no one would. So there was no point in trying to force an answer out of someone who has no answer to a question. Are you sure Kakabiel's here, Issei? Akeno whispered to break the tension between the members of the small group. I'm almost certain he is. If Fried was waiting there, he must be guarding something. There was a short silence before Issei heavily sighed. I'm talking about the stray exorcist. Issei had to elaborate what he meant when he was talking about Fried, as no one other than him knew who he was. The Gremory peerage didn't respond to Issei's elaboration. An uncomfortable silence fell upon the group for the smallest moment before Riaz interrupted it with her own question. How did you know this staircase was hiding under the altar, anyway? Issei remained silent as he was not intending on answering the question. He couldn't really answer the question without seeming suspicious, as he could only mention his omnipotence. He could lie and tell Riaz that Fried had told him it was under the altar, but he was sure that the devil group had heard their earlier conversation. It was a hunch, of sorts. Issei had finally responded. His answer seemed to satisfy the devil as she remained silent for the duration of their short journey down a dark staircase. Eventually, a soft light flickered against the walls as the group approached the bottom, Issei sighing in relief as he was able to see again. In front of them was a giant stone door that had many intricate symbols carved into it in a strangely artistic manner. This reminds me of a dungeon from a video game. Issei muttered to himself. He approached the door, a hand raised as he prepared himself to push the structure open, but as he touched the stone, something threw him backwards. Kaneko caught the omnipotent human in her arms and held onto him with an iron grip. Not safe? She asked, her eyes following the lines of symbols. Issei shook his head in response. No, it's not safe. I'll probably have to destroy the door with magic. Issei pried Kaneko's hands off of him and jumped out of her arms, landing on his own 2 feet with a flourish of an arm. Stand back, everybody. Issei let a few seconds pass to allow the Gremory group to back away from the door, his foot tapping against the floor in a steady rhythm. He glanced behind him, seeing that everyone was a safe distance away from the large door, and clicked his fingers. The door twisted and contorted as Issei's overwhelming magic surged through it, causing bulges to appear on the surface of the door. It pulsed once, twice and then exploded on the third count, sending giant chunks of rock all throughout the hall and onto the staircase. A few of the larger chunks bounced past Issei, over the Gremory group and onto the staircase where they lodged themselves, blocking the way they came from. Issei deadpanned. Are you serious? This actually reminds me of some anime and video games. A wave of dust suddenly exploded into the air as the roof of the staircase caved in, effectively making sure the human and his devil friends couldn't escape in case of an emergency. Well, the only way is forward, then. Issei muttered to himself in disbelief. Issei stretched his arms out in front of him as he watched the rising dust cloud, waiting for an opportune moment to strike. Here I go. He whispered to himself as he quickly burst through the dust cloud and into the room that the door was protecting, skidding to a stop on a hard stone floor. Needless to say, the room was not what he expected, and it was different from the last time he had seen it. Its ceiling was still high but was made of a grey polished stone. The walls were made of a similar material, but had red banners covering most of it. The floor was made of a white stone that Issei thought was marble because of its pale glistening shine. The crowd of fallen angels and stray exorcists stood on the edges of the room, as if they were anticipating Issei's arrival, a multitude of sneers and smirks tainting their already tainted faces. Kakabiel sat upon a lavish throne as if he was a king. Oh? You figured me out, human. Kakabiel bellowed from his seat on his throne, his loud, strong voice echoing around the room. The fallen angel jumped to his feet with crossed arms and stared down at Issei, as if the human was nothing but trash, a smirk plastered on his face. Full of confidence, are we? Issei responded with a grin, using a single leg to support most of his weight as he too held folded arms against his chest. We'll see how quickly I can crush both your confidence and your pride. Kakabiel huffed in amusement as Riaz and her peerage emerged from the settling dust cloud. Relying on some friends, are we? I thought we would have an honorable duel. Issei chuckled in response, his grin widening. Honorable duel? You don't know the definition of honor. Kakabiel rose an eyebrow. Is that so? Very well, then. Kakabiel clicked his fingers and watched as his loyal warriors swarmed Issei and his devil friends, many bullets and spears of light raining down on them. A red barrier that was made up of magic circles surrounded Riaz's peerage as Issei dove into the swarms of stray exorcists, bodies flying as he slowly made his way to Kakabiel. Issei pulled his head back and gathered as much air as his lungs could handle before he released it with a roar, watching as waves of his enemies were pushed back by a cyclonic gust of wind. He hopped over their bodies and approached Kakabiel with his hands jammed into his pockets, his face marred by an annoyed frown. I didn't expect you to make it this far. Kakabiel had to raise an arm to block the wild punch that was sent his way, surprised from the speed that Issei had displayed. He was faster than their last encounter, that much was certain, but how did he had achieved this level of speed in such a small amount of time that left no room for training was unknown to Kakabiel. A few hours ago, Issei was struggling to beat him in hand-to-hand combat. Kakabiel was quick to note that Issei's fists were now traveling faster than his eyes could see. There was a reason for this, however, as Kakabiel was not utilizing his full power. When he takes form in the human world without Azazel's knowledge, he needs to suppress his power with a magical seal to avoid the attention of other supernatural beings. It was a minor inconvenience and an annoyance, as the aftereffects of the seal left an uncomfortable feeling inside of the fallen angel's body, but as Kakabiel shattered the seal with a large burst of magic that sent Issei flying backwards into a throng of stray exorcists, the feeling had disappeared. Kakabiel was ready to end Issei's life. Kakabiel peered down at a fist that he had unintentionally clenched, feeling the power of his grip draw blood from his palms. Kakabiel glanced up at Issei as he rose from a pile of unmoving bodies, his hair shadowing his stoic eyes. Issei wasn't angry. No, he had no reason to be angry. It's not like he actually cared about Rainer or Riaz and her peerage, he only felt pity and a slight regret from had occurred in the past, both in this timeline and his own unreadable past. Too many things had happened and he felt the need to lash out on someone, something that could handle his full power. He didn't even know why he was acting so out of character. Lately, whenever he is injured, he noted that he tends to form irrational thoughts and anger that fueled his desire to kill. And he had found that something that could be killed. Kakabiel, the angel of the stars, was standing in front of him. The fallen angel that most thought was one of the most powerful beings in existence was nothing but a tool that could be used to demonstrate Issei's true power. Issei had been holding back for far too long now. His pointless acts of seeming weak and powerless were over. He was ready to unleash everything he could. It wasn't that he was weak even when he was pretending to be weak. Issei could crush everyone as if they were mere ants under his shoe. There were no worthy challengers in the vicinity. Not even Kakabiel could be deemed to be worthy, his power was far too small when compared with an omnipotent being's limitless strength. And Issei was ready to give Kakabiel a taste of his true power. I had once known what it had felt like to be loved. That light sensation that grips your heart and fills you with a comforting warmth was the only thing that was keeping me alive. But I no longer care for my life as I have no one to love. I have no reason to live anymore because no one loves me. Nothing is tying me to this dastardly empty existence anymore, and I embrace my non-existent future, hoping that there is no such thing as life after death. The sweet embrace of an empty mind was what I craved. I just wanted to die and I thought that Issei would have granted me my wish as he mercilessly tortured me. Issei, although he had inflicted the worst pain I could feel upon me, the short time I had spent with him was fun. He alleviated my mental pain, and I thought he was going to bestow me with the love that I had come to crave. It didn't have to be romantic or overly intimate. I wanted to feel as if I was worth something because I have no value and am ultimately useless. Not even a powerless human would want me. So, as I sit here in the darkness, holding my knees to my chest as my dead eyes stare at the dirt floor, I can't help but wonder why. I can't help but wonder why I won't kill myself. Why? I've told myself countless times that I'm better off being dead. No one cares for me anymore and I have no real friends. No one would miss me if I suddenly died. Not even the man that I had once loved. But Issei had offered me life when I was giving him death. Would I not be branded as a fool if I was not accepting of his offer? This human had offered me a reason to live again, after all. He had made me human, the thing I had once protected. So I am no longer a fallen angel, and I now have a chance to start a new life, a life that will lead me to the love that I crave. Knowing this, shouldn't I despise death and embrace the future? Alas, nothing changed within me as I came to know that shocking truth. My empty heart remained empty, my silent mind remained silent, and my motionless body remained motionless. Unmoving, unfeeling and unthinking. I wanted to end my suffering already, but I didn't have the means to do so. My magic has been sealed away, I'm too weak and afraid to end myself with my own hands, and there's nothing around me. I sat in an empty darkness, sitting on the dirty ground, wishing that I would die. I want to die. I want to die. I want to die. Issei wiped a sliver of blood that had escaped the corner of his mouth. He stared down at it for a split second as he regained his breath, finding that he was reaching his limit. Kakabiel wasn't faring much better in the face of his enemy. Several bones had been fractured or broken in the short but fierce fight, and a few organs had been punctured. But Kakabiel didn't pay attention to his physical condition or pain. As long as he was able to defeat Issei, he was fine with his death. He had lived too long and had seen too much pain and corruption to the point that it had slowly driven him insane, forcing him out of heaven and into the underworld, where his old companion Azazel had welcomed him with open arms. If only he could return to the days where life was truly peaceful. How he craved the touch of his deceased friends and family. All he wanted was his memories of the past to become real once more. His first lover, his first friend, his first kill. He wanted to return to the time when everything was simpler. However, he knew that that was impossible. Turning back time was not something that could be accomplished by any known being in the universe, so Kakabiel had to deal with his grief and suffering as he warded off Issei, watching as his loyal warriors were mercilessly destroyed by a small peerage of weak devils. So, as he stood in the middle of the stone hall, facing the strongest enemy he has ever gone up against, he grinned. He grinned because he was going to kill his opponent and claim the title of a victor, even if it meant he had to die in the process. He didn't care about his life anymore. He didn't care about anyone or anything anymore. All he wanted was to win. Faster than most eyes could see, Issei and Kakabiel threw themselves at their opponent at the same time. Countless amounts of punches, kicks and magic attacks were thrown around as if they were nothing, the mere wind pressure from their final confrontation, threatening to blast the both of them away. Both warriors steeled themselves and held their ground, slowly becoming weaker, slowly losing their power and slowly losing their lives. Issei endured a blow to the solar plexus, blood shooting from his mouth in a crimson spray. Kakabiel clenched his teeth as he suffered a kick to the neck, his head snapping to the side as blood seeped through the gaps in his teeth. They were at a stalemate, they would both die before one killed the other. There was no competition anymore. If they did not put all of their strength into a final attack, they would die together in a pitiful hellhole that no one knew about. Kakabiel. Issei screamed as he pulled his fist back, a dark blue flame engulfing his fist in an extravagant flicker of light. Issei. Kakabiel responded with his own scream, his hand outstretched as he gathered all of his magical power into his final attack. Issei burst forward in an incredible display of speed and threw his fist into an uppercut, his face inches away from a large magical circle that would definitely blow his head off. Issei's fist continued its trajectory upwards, but just as it was about to connect with Kakabiel's chin, missed as the fallen angel tilted his head back. A grin of pure malice spread across Kakabiel's face. "You fucked up, Issei. You absolutely fucked up." A giant cloud of grey smoke filled the room as an explosion of epic proportions came forth from Kakabiel's magical circle, effectively ending Issei's life. Ah, what a waste of talent. Kakabiel spat a glob of blood on the floor as he struggled to stand upright, his legs slowly losing their strength to the point that Kakabiel was forced to collapse on the spot. Off in the distance, amid the sounds of an ongoing battle, a distant shout was heard. Kakabiel turned his to the side, finding a silhouette standing in the smoke as he smiled, realizing that his time was up. He didn't know if he had actually killed Issei, and he couldn't care less. He was dying and was going to meet his friends in whatever afterlife there was. But, just as Kakabiel was about to release his attack, Kakabiel had felt something in the atmosphere shift. It wasn't the mood of the fight, the actual air and the surrounding had changed in some way, and it had allowed Issei to survive the blast. "So I've been outsmarted, huh?" The smoke was blown away by a gentle wind. Issei hovered in the air, his hands in his pocket as he stared down at Kakabiel. The human didn't move. He didn't make an effort to say anything. He stared down at Kakabiel, watching as the fallen angel struggled to move his arm. Kakabiel didn't kill Issei. His attack wasn't even close to hitting the human. "You should just end me already." Kakabiel's sight was growing dimmer by the second. "Is that your final wish, Kakabiel?" "Yes." The conviction in Kakabiel's voice was too strong. He had accepted his fate and nothing would change his mind. Kakabiel wanted to die at the end of a glorious battle to prove to himself that his life was worth living, even if it would end shortly after. He didn't mind if he had survived the fight, either. Kakabiel would have committed an honorable suicide next to the corpse of his opponent if it came down to that. Then so be it. Issei pointed an outstretched hand in Kakabiel's direction, a small magical circle appearing. "Your life and everything it stood for will soon disappear." Kakabiel watched as the silhouette dispersed, a small smile forming on his face. He would meet his lover in the afterlife, and that was all he could have asked for. An explosion rocked the area as Kakabiel's body was devoured by an inferno. "I see you've not only fallen from heaven, Rainer," Issei called out as he peered into a cage that had been concealed by a rather strong dose of illusion magic. The cage in question was small. It was large enough to fit a person of average stature if they were sitting cross-legged with a straight back, but was not large enough for a person to lay on their back with an outstretched body, or if they were standing. The metallic bars of the cage were thicker than Issei's forearm and shone brightly in the artificial light of the large room, magic ceiling seals placed all over the hard metal. It was designed to be hard to break into. Rainer glanced up at Issei and stared at him, her head buried in between the two knees that she held to her chest. Pain. Pain and regret were the two emotions that were present in her dead eyes. Her violet orbs were dull and lifeless and lacked the warmth that Issei had seen earlier on in the day. Issei shoved a tightly clenched hand into a pocket and grimaced. "What's that supposed to mean?" the fallen angel quietly asked, her voice as equally empty and dull as her voice was. Issei felt conflicted as he stared down at the supernatural being. What he was doing here offering Raynor his silent pity, he did not know. He had been asked by Rias to assist her in defeating Kakabiel, and that was all. Issei didn't even care about Raynor in the slightest, nor did he care about Rias and her peerage. In fact, Issei did not know why he had helped Rias. Sure, Issei would have an increased reputation with the devils of this town and the Grigori if Azazel was accepting of what had happened, but the whole matter was dull and uninteresting to him. There was no immediate gain or benefit from defeating Kakabiel. Issei scratched his cheek in confusion as his mind needed a second to process his thoughts. I don't know what I was trying to say, either. Anyway, it's about time I set you free. Issei poked the cage and watched as the bars instantly shattered, the magical seals offering very little resistance in the way of an omnipotent being's power. Just leave me here. Issei watched as Raynor's head lolled around on the base of her neck as her quiet voice escaped her lips. Dejected, alone and afraid, three key features that were somewhat identifiable through the fallen angel's actions. Why? Issei asked as he crouched down to meet Raynor's lifeless eyes with his own. Because I'm worthless. Issei snorted at Raynor's sudden remark and grabbed her cool wrist with his hand. Issei's eyes scanned the entirety of her milky arm as he gently traced his index finger down the appendage, noting the smooth texture and comfortable cold it offered. Issei's eyes meet Raynor's once more as he clasped both of his hands over her own. Useless? Why do you believe that? Issei's voice was barely a whisper. Raynor responded in an instant. Because I have no value. Two hands fell to Issei's side as he silently pushed himself to his feet, his eyes never leaving Raynor's. I don't think feel or exist on my own terms. Knees were pulled tighter to a chest as a head rested in between them. My whole life, I've never done anything by myself. I've always been controlled by someone or something. Raynor lifted her head as tears flowed down her cheeks, her raw emotions a mere contrast to her dead eyes and empty expression. I've never known what it's like to be free. Issei quietly released a shaky breath of stale air he hadn't realized he was holding, a nausea-inducing knot forming in his stomach. Twisting and turning, wrenching at his insides as he unconsciously fell back one step with his arms wrapped around his abdomen. Despite his omnipotence and range of experiences, Issei couldn't hold back the shiver that chilled him to his core as he fell to his knees, his eyes wide. He hadn't expected this when he arrived in this universe. He hadn't expected his sudden insanity. He hadn't expected his sudden urge to torture someone in his insanity. He hadn't expected the pity he felt for Raynor. He didn't expect his conflict with Kakabiel. He hadn't expected this. The emotionally broken fallen angel that couldn't help herself in her greatest time of need. The way the fallen angel stared up at him with her dead eyes and empty expression. The way the fallen angel wanted to end her life. The cold sweat ran down Issei's back as he began to crawl towards Raynor. Although he had wanted to change the future, he did not consider the consequences he would face when making such a foolish decision. He should have let this universe run its course without interfering as he usually does. But now that he has achieved a part of what he desires, he is facing the results of his actions, the one thing that he did not think of when selfishly thinking of himself. Raynor, I'm sorry, Issei muttered as he held a hand out in the air, his fingertips lightly brushing against Raynor's cheek as she flinched under his gentle touch. This is all my fault. A small smile slipped onto the fallen angel's face as Issei slowly wrapped his arms around her, holding her head against his chest. What are you sorry for? You've done nothing wrong. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for ruining your life, for being here, for killing Kakabiel, for existing, for Issei grimaced as he felt something form in his heart, his words struggling to leave his mouth. It was the first time he had felt such a thing in a long time. It wasn't happiness, anger, nor was it love, it was pure sadness. Despite his one regret and lack of emotional familiarity with his companions, he felt a cold feeling in his chest that could only be described as sadness. Raynor wrapped her arms around Issei's torso as her cheeks became stained with her tears. I should be the one thanking you. She whispered as she closed her eyes, the beating of Issei's heart resonating in her mind as she silently smiled. Issei gulped as he stared at two gloriously giant mounds that comfortably sat opposite him. Oh, what the hell am I doing? He muttered to himself as he rolled over, resisting his masculine urges in favor of retaining what little dignity he thought he had. The naked body of what could be considered a beautiful girl was hard to resist after all, so holding back his perverse thoughts and actions consumed all of his willpower. Not too much time had passed before he had rolled over once more, staring at Raynor's two mounds without a shred of dignity remaining. I have now stooped to the level of my perverted counterparts, and there is nothing wrong with it, not yet, at least. Issei repeated those words in his mind as he slowly breathed, owlishly staring at the twin peaks of the two mounds without any regrets. Even if I'm caught doing this, I have no regrets. Issei was broken out of his stupor by the quiet vibrations of his phone on his desk, an almost silent alarm crying out in an attempt to disturb the sleep of anyone who was near it. Unfortunately, Issei was quick to turn it off as he jumped out of bed, switching the alarm off with a singular swipe of a finger, effectively ruining the mood of the non-sentient object. It wasn't as if the alarm would have woken Issei up on any other day. No, he'd continue to sleep, oblivious as to what's happening in the world around him as he buried himself in blankets and pillows that almost suffocate him. But it wasn't himself that Issei was worried about. It was Rainer. A couple of days had passed since the Kakabiel incident. Diplomatic meetings between devils and fallen angels regularly take place at Kuo Academy to sort out the specifics of the incident and how it had come to be, Kakabiel's planned insurgents being the main topic of discussion. Luckily for Issei, no one had broken through his window in the middle of the night and had killed him in his sleep. The same could be said for Rainer, however, she was more concerned about encountering an old companion or associate that would try to take her away from Issei and the new life she was building. Rainer's new life involved lazing around all day doing nothing, cuddling Issei whenever she had the chance to, and sleeping with a teenage boy naked. Absolutely butt naked. No underwear, no shyness, no messing around. Rainer shamelessly slept with a teenage boy that she hadn't known for more than a week absolutely naked. Rainer didn't have a problem with it. None at all. Issei did at first, but those idiotic feelings slowly dispersed as his hidden Hyoudou perversion surfaced after a millennia of rest. How could he not be fine with it? He'd be stupidly weird if he did have a problem with it in the end. Not that he cared about what others thought of him. If he wanted to be stupidly weird, he'd be stupidly weird. If he didn't want to suffocate in 2 glorious mounds of soft flesh during his sleep, he didn't want to suffocate. For some strange reason, Issei couldn't shake off the feeling that no one would understand his dilemma if he told them about it. Fortunately for Issei, his parents didn't understand his dilemma because they didn't know about it in the first place. While his mother and father knew the trainer, known to them as Yuma Mono, was living with them due to some heavy magical influence and a cover-up story, they had no idea what the fallen angel and Issei did at night. For all they cared, they could be engaging in sexual intercourse, and there would be nothing wrong with it. As long as his parents received their deserved sleep, they were fine with whatever the two did. However, they did insist that Rainer at least go to school if she was going to do nothing all day. And that's what Issei was going to achieve today. For the first time in a few days, Issei Hyoudou was going to Kuo Academy to persuade Sona Citri, the student council president and heir of the Citri Devil clan, to allow Rainer to join the school. If the encounter annoyed the hell out of Issei, so be it. This was all for the sake of his own sanity. Indeed, Issei's sanity was slowly degrading as Rainer clung to him as if he was a life support machine. While Rainer did need some emotional support, she didn't need to drape her arms around Issei at every given chance because she felt insecure and unsafe without his touch. By attending school, Issei was hoping that Rainer would be able to rebuild her confidence in life so she was not as dependent. It was all for Rainer's sake. Issei quickly reminded himself that he didn't actually care about Rainer. Not yet, at least. The duty of looking after her was shoved onto him by that insufferable red-haired devil anyway, so he'll be damned if he started to care about the fallen angel. The less he saw her, the less attached he'll become, not that he'd become attached to her in the first place. But, if Issei was truly honest with himself, he knew that his main reasoning for sending Rainer to school was because he didn't want her to discover his secret stash of secret stuff that mainly consisted of various materials that had been designed for an extracurricular activity, even though he knew that the chances of it already being discovered were high. He was only a male, supposedly teenage, human, after all, and if the greatest pleasure of a human male was abruptly taken away from him, he'd definitely start a killing spree. Issei, kid, I need to see you after class. Issei rose an eyebrow, staring up at his chemistry teacher in disinterest. What is it about? You? Issei sighed and slumped over his desk, his hands draping over the edge as his cheek lay on a comfortably cool textbook. It was unusual for Issei to stay back after class. In fact, the only time he had stayed after class was when he was trying to avoid his first contact with Rainer. Unfortunately, that attempt to avoid the fallen angel proved to be a waste of time as his teacher had places to be. So, with his teacher's request in mind, Issei tuned out the remaining segments of his class and the dismissal of his classmates. The lingering groups were ushered out of the room by the teacher, the door was quietly shut, and, as the chemistry teacher took her place on the edge of the desk that was in front of Issei's, she crossed her arms under her bust. So, what's been happening, kid? Issei glanced up at his teacher and huffed, lifting his head off of his textbook. Nothing, actually. So you've been away from school for the past few days just because? Issei nodded once and glanced at the nearby window, noting the blue sky. It wasn't as if he had wanted to stay home, although he didn't mind that he had. And it was all because he was forced to take care of Rainer, because she had been broken in various different ways, wasting some precious time that could have been spent on entertaining himself. Oh, how Issei now regretted getting involved with the fallen angel. His having to take care of her as if she was a mentally challenged child made him rethink his decision to spare her. Yup. Issei simply replied as he placed his head back on his textbook, ignoring his teacher's face palm. I know you don't like homework and all of that stuff, but you need to come to school every day to be well educated. Some of the other teachers have a problem with you, mainly the art teacher, but you're a good kid. You just need to put your brain to use. Issei groaned as his chemistry teacher of all people gave him that lecture. Sure, he'll admit that he's often lazy and irresponsible, but he knew that he could pass whatever exam or assignment he was given. Not that anyone knew that, of course. Most of his teachers thought he was a lost cause because he never handed work in on time. No amount of requested interviews did anything because his parents were always working. Issei was, in their eyes, a waste of time. I know. I've received that lecture before. You don't have to tell me twice. Issei's chemistry teacher grinned and crossed one leg over the other, continuing to stare down at her student. Anyway, what do you think of those creeps that have been wandering around the school? I've been told that they're international businessmen that are interested in making investments in this hellhole. Issei raised his head once more. Wait, seriously? You've been told they're businessmen? The teacher nodded once in response, waiting for Issei to rant on about the subject matter as he sighed. Miss, no offense to you, but they look nothing like businessmen. Sure, they wear suits, but the majority of them are tall, overly muscular, and exude some kind of pressure from their bodies. You'd have to be really stupid to believe the person who told you that. So, you're saying they're supernatural beings? Also, don't call me miss when we're alone. You make me feel like an old woman. Just call me. The door slid open as two men entered the classroom. One had long crimson hair that reached down to his shoulders and back with blue-green eyes. He was tall but slim and wore a black suit with a red tie. He stepped ahead of the second man whose hair was short and spiky, colored black with blonde bangs. He too wore a black suit that was accentuated with a black tie. Issei rose an eyebrow. Oh, it's you too. The crimson-haired man's eyes sharpened as he grimaced. Issei Hyoudou, you are under arrest for the murder of Kakabiel and Razor Phoenix. Issei's teacher stared at the two men dumbfounded before she glanced down at her student's passive expression. No emotions, other than a small grin that revealed that he had expected the two men to find him. Issei, you murdered someone. Issei stared up at his teacher. Correction, I may have murdered one of them. End of the here. So that's it for today's video guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.